Alex and I have been doing this podcast for a while, and we have reviewed some of the most overwhelmingly white shows and still managed to relate to the material or the characters. So there's no reason why anybody shouldn't be able to watch Lincoln Heights and find something that resonates. You have no excuse. Watch Lincoln Heights.
Right. Seriously, watch Lincoln Heights. Hello, everyone. This is Alex.
And this is Em.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Good, the Bad, the Basic.
This is the podcast for nostalgic Gen X and millennials and binge watchers of all ages.
On this podcast, we'll be discussing what we love, what we hate, and what's just a bit problematic about the TV and movies that we're addicted to, and do a bit of rewriting where necessary.
For much more exclusive content, become a show producer on Patreon and get access to after the episode bonuses, curated playlists, movie reviews, music video retrospectives, and so much more. Join the GBB family at patreon.com/goodbadbasic.
On today's episode, we'll be diving into the trials and tribulations of the Sutton family, the stars of the ABC family drama Lincoln Heights.
Lasting 2 years and 4 seasons on ABC Family, Lincoln Heights chronicled the lives of a Black LA cop patrolling one of the most dangerous areas of the city and how drastically his family's lives change when he moves them to the notorious Lincoln Heights community.
The 70s and 90s were a golden era for Black family sitcoms, but Lincoln Heights is one of the few Black family dramas in existence.
So how did the series manage to survive as long as it did on a network like ABC Family? And why do we still have such a soft spot for the series a decade after its cancellation?
Stay tuned.
All right, you guys, so here's some information about Lincoln Heights before we jump in. Lincoln Heights is a drama and a family drama. It was created by Seth Freeman, and it aired on ABC Family from January 8th of 2007 to November 9th of 2009. It lasted 4 seasons and a total of 43 episodes. The show stars Russell Hornsby as Eddie Sutton, Nikki Michaud as Jen Sutton, Erica Hubbard as Cassie Sutton, Ryan Nicole Brown as Lizzie Sutton, Michonne Ratliff as Tay Sutton, and Robert Adamson as Charles Antoni. So that is our main cast of characters. And a recurring character that we see a lot would be Michael Riley Burke as Kevin Lund, Eddie's partner, Chadwick Boseman as Nate Ray Taylor, and Alice Gregson as Sage Marika Lund. So these are the people that we're going to be seeing the most of. This is our core family and their extended network of friends and acquaintances. So let's jump right into season 1. Season 1 was 13 episodes long, and I believe that season 1 was season 1 was the longest season. So let's jump right in, Alex. What are some of our main plots and subplots in season 1?
Right. So I'm actually really excited. So Lincoln Heights was a show that I had suggested, and I'm so excited that we're talking about it because it's a show that definitely, I don't know that it lingers in our popular cultural consciousness, but it's definitely one of the shows that absolutely lingers in mine. I'm always thinking about the show. I always go back to the show precisely because of what we said in the intro, that it's really one of the very few Black family dramas in existence. Season 1 is a really interesting season because essentially season 1 will set up the show, but I think that you do feel a big shift in the show from season 1 to season 2. So season 1, it will be a bit more of it pretty much operates as like your sort of standard police procedural with this like family happening like in the sort of not background but as like a secondary plot. Like we have like there's like a drug sting and like a bank robbery shootout. And I mean, there are even parts of, I think, the first season of Lincoln Heights that kind of even feel like 24 a bit, in that
Mm-hmm.
like they're very like suspenseful. Like you have these plots that are super suspenseful and shot in this very like LA like cop gritty way. But that, like I said, that will shift. But the reason that I'm so excited to talk about this show is because this show was so ambitious. This is an extremely ambitious show. I think there are a lot of things that this show touches on that in terms of thinking about Black people, Black life, that we haven't really seen a series touch on since, which is extremely significant, and we'll absolutely get into it.
Yeah, so we meet the Sutton family. It's a family of five. Eddie, the father, is a cop. Jen, his wife, is a nurse, and they have their three kids, but they're living in this very cramped apartment with there's like one bathroom. I think there's like two bedrooms. I believe one of the children, their son Tay, sleeping on the couch in the beginning. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
Right.
the girls are sharing a bedroom. It's really cramped. They can't afford to move anywhere else, and the police department gives an initiative to Eddie and the other cops. Basically, like if they can, they'll give them like the money for a down payment on a house, but the house has to be in Lincoln Heights. And this former crack house is basically going at a steal. So he decides to take them up on the offer and get this house and basically renovate it. And, talks his wife into the situation where they could have their dream house. Their kids could all have their own room. Everyone can have their space. They can have a real kitchen. There'll be enough bathrooms for everyone. The only hitch is that the house would be in Lincoln Heights.
And even then, like something that's significant is that Lincoln Heights is Eddie's old neighborhood. Like Lincoln Heights is where Eddie grew up. That's where he's from, right?
We see that moving back here becomes as much of a culture shock for him as it is for his family, which is interesting to watch.
Just in that dynamic alone, it's already like this really you're already getting this really layered story, this interesting story, right? This sort of prodigal son of Lincoln Heights returning to the place of his former home. Eddie's in law enforcement, he's a cop. So so there's that aspect of it. And then there's this other sort of aspect of it, I think, that we're always talking about among Black people in culture about, in terms of thinking about the way and thinking about like if we have to have police, how do we want to be policed? And here, and one of the things that we talk about is, police need to be living in the neighborhoods that they're policing, right? Instead of being in charge of a beat in a certain area and then they don't have to live in that area. Here, the show is like giving you an example of that. Right. So in 2007, like people are already like, this is something that people are talking about. This is something we're thinking about, or that these writers are thinking about, and they're very ahead. So like that's super interesting to me. I want to talk about the sex worker plot. I think that happens at the like end of season 1.
Yeah, the show didn't spend a lot of time on this, but the time that it did spend on it was significant. So the family meets Mama Taylor, the woman who raised Eddie after his mother was killed, and we meet Mama Taylor's daughter, Dana, who was Eddie's first love. They dated when they were like 16 years old. And we learn that Dana is a sex worker. She is specifically a prostitute or escort. This is just what she has to do. She has to make a living. She would like a more legit source of income, but she can't get it right now. And she has a young son, Jerome, that she has to take care of in addition to helping her mother out. And Lincoln Heights deals with class on various episodes, actually. We learned early on that although Eddie was raised in Lincoln Heights, Jennifer was raised by a a wealthy Black family. Her parents have a lot of money. Her father is a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that, it really impacts the ways that they deal with this revelation that Dana is a sex worker. Jen instinctively and unfairly judges Dana because she just assumes that, everybody's got a choice, and basically neglects the privileges that have allowed her to get into the career of her choice. And so this is one of the first times, but definitely not the last time, that the show has a very real, honest conversation about class disparity within the Black community. And I thought that the sex worker plot was really great because this is one of the rare occasions where sex workers have been humanized in popular media.
Exactly. Dana is a complete person, and we won't leave Dana. It's not like Dana will have this one episode and then we will never hear from her ever again. She's a recurring character. She's not part of the regular cast, but we will continue to sort of check in on Dana and Dana's son, Jerome, and Mama Taylor throughout the run of the series. But she also is a very stand-up person. She's a very regular person. In the episode, Cassie's trying to decide when she wants to have sex with Charles, thinking about that. And like any, I think, regular teenage girl, she doesn't want to talk to her mom. So she talks to another female adult. And Jen thinks that Dana's going to tell her, yeah, girl, just go out there and I don't know, do whatever. And instead, Dana gives her this really measured, really fair, good advice.
Right. She's not just judging Dana morally because of the work that she does. She also just assumes that because she does that work, then she doesn't know how to properly parent, even though Dana has a child.
Right.
She's just gonna advise my daughter to just go out there and fuck whomever, wherever, however. And Dana's not that type of woman. She can separate her work from the advice that she's giving to a teenage girl. She is a good person. And I think this is something that the show does that I think is really, really beautiful. It doesn't just keep her as a character that's in the gray. Regardless of one's personal feelings about sex work, I personally am pro-sex work. People do this shit for free every day. In the case of the Dana character in particular, Dana's actually portrayed as a much better person than a lot of our other supporting characters. I'm going to go on record and say that Jen Sutton and Eddie's partner, Kevin Lund, were the most annoying people on this show to me. And I know Jen is a wife character, and I see a lot of redeeming qualities in Jen, but literally every single time Dana, her family, or anything about socioeconomic class comes up, Jen's responses are so cringe. She's a good wife and she's a good mother, and she has an abundance of great qualities. And while I appreciate the way her character is written because I think that her responses are incredibly realistic, I don't appreciate that those are the responses. I want to talk about two sets of people that we will see in further seasons. The first is the first main antagonist that we meet, Bishop, who's a local drug dealer who we'll meet in other seasons. And the other becomes an ally of the Sutton family, Reverend Hammond, who at first Eddie pegs incorrectly as someone who's just profiting off of trauma, this, for pay community activist. And he pegs Eddie unfairly as another cop who gets off on taking young lives in the community. They really reach an understanding and get to know each other, and they become quite close for a while.
Right, because at the end of season 1, he isn't involved in a shooting. He shoots someone that's trying to burglar the store.
Yeah, this is actually in the beginning of season 1. They hit us with this early. He shot this guy for a few reasons. He actually was reaching for a weapon, and more importantly, when Eddie got to the scene, his daughter, Cassie, was there, her soon-to-be boyfriend, Charles. So he already came into the situation from a sense of very real fear and panic. And then he tried to reason with this guy, and he took out his gun, or was reaching for his gun anyway. Eddie is investigated by internal affairs for all of this, shooting this gang member named Donnell. and it becomes a whole thing, and it really colors the way the neighborhood views him for the season. He tries to make amends with Donnell's mother. She's not having it. The bishop doesn't believe him, and we see why. We meet another black cop in later seasons who is absolutely like the embodiment of police brutality.
Right. Powell.
The neighborhood really has to get to know Eddie, and more importantly, Eddie and his family needs to get to know the neighborhood. Alex brought up, policing the communities that you lived in earlier. This is something that prison abolitionists and police reformists have been talking about for literal decades, and I've never seen it portrayed on television before.
What I love is that, particularly about Donnell, is, I think in a lot of shows today, like they'll have unarmed Black kids getting shot because shows today think they're being deep or whatever. But the big thing that Lincoln Heights does that I don't think other shows really do is that, he shoots Donnell, but we meet Donnell's mom. We meet like his brother. We see like the family behind like that is in actual pain, right?
Right. That's significant because it doesn't end with the dead person. Like when you're dead, like your problems are essentially over. The problems only really begin for the people who are in your life who've lost you now, right? Eddie even attempting to make amends with Donnell's mother is significant because we have a string of cops on television now, and I'm not talking about like TV series, I'm talking about like real life news broadcasts who will gun down a Black kid, show absolutely no remorse, never apologize, don't have a word of condolence to say to the family. And when the Black family is interviewed, they're expected to apologize on behalf of the person that they've lost, which is just throwing salt in the wounds, very fresh wounds. Eddie doesn't ask Donnell's mom to apologize on his behalf. He doesn't try to justify with I had to do it. Like he knows he had to do it, but he doesn't tell her that. It's not the right time or place to tell her that. At the end of the day, she's lost her kid and he's still very much alive, and that will never not be true. And he's aware of this. And he treats her like he would want to be treated as a parent. He doesn't see her as somehow different than him or her kids as, largely different from his kids or the kids that he grew up with or whom he might have been if he hadn't left the neighborhood when he did.
And the fact that the show does this, I think really, truly sets it apart. This was like an ABC family show. It was an ABC family show. This was essentially supposed to be for like kids. And you have the show confronting in an extremely nuanced, extremely layered way these thoughts and ideas. And it's something to behold because I don't think other shows do it right still.
The show only has 43 episodes. It is incredibly hard to accomplish this with less than 100 episodes. So the fact that people wanted to see more of the show for me is quite significant. My only point of contention, honestly, is that on Hulu, if you search for Lincoln Heights, it'll have it under dramas, but it'll also have it under Black stories, which it is. It is. It's very Black, not just that the family is Black, but so many things that happen on the show, you cannot like interpose those or swap them out for white people or even brown people because a lot of the issues are like very Black centric. But it's one of the things that Black artists and Black authors talk about all the time. You'll go to a bookstore and all the Black authors will be in one place, even though like their books are various genres. What ends up happening is that if you don't go to that specific Black section, you'll probably not see their books.
Right. No, exactly.
Which is a problem because I feel like Lincoln Heights is a show that needs to be seen by everyone. And it's a show that I feel like is relatable to everyone. I mean, Alex and I have been doing this podcast for a while, and we have reviewed some of the most overwhelmingly white shows and still managed to relate to the material or the characters. So there's no reason why anybody shouldn't be able to watch Lincoln Heights and find something that resonates. You have no excuse. Watch Lincoln Heights.
Right. Seriously, watch Lincoln Heights. And also, like, I think if you're a writer,
if you're a white writer and you are putting Black people in your stories and you have not seen Lincoln Heights, honestly, already it's an F. Watch it. It's required viewing if you're doing that.
If you're learning writing or if you're like working to be like a writer looking, I definitely think Lincoln Heights is should be on your required viewing.
I agree. It's incredible how many social issues they've managed to pack in the 4, very brief seasons that they did have. All right, let's talk about Lizzie's kidnapping. So I mentioned our primary antagonist, who we will revisit in later seasons. This gangster named Bishop comes out of the woodwork. He and Eddie butt heads because Eddie knows that he's behind a lot of what's going on in the community and that he's ordering, other gang members to do certain things, but he cannot really prove any of it. And to try to get Eddie off his back, Bishop orders 2 of his men to go into Eddie's house and basically vandalize it and basically show Eddie that he isn't welcome there. But Lizzie, who had left for school early, returns to the home as this is happening because she forgot something. And one of the guys suggests kidnapping her, which is exactly what they do. One of the things I really loved about the show was how it didn't forget about the younger siblings, Tay and Lizzie, and just focus on the older teen daughter, Cassie, and her relationship. Lizzie and Tay are fixers and their lives are important to the writers of the show, and it shows. And one of the major plots with Lizzie is this kidnapping, where basically she's got to use her wits and her charm and her negotiation skills to get out of the situation. And this is the first time when I really noticed how much Lizzie is like Eddie. She's smart. She thinks quickly on her feet. She knows how to talk to people. People with good intentions really gravitate to and resonate with her. And Lizzie more or less keeps her wits about her in this situation. Eddie ends up saving her, but after she saves herself. And it's really significant when this happens. We realize that Eddie and Jen's kids are a lot tougher than they give them credit for.
Right, which is later then reinforced when Eddie's like, okay, we're leaving, and all the kids are like, no, I'm cool here.
Right, they're like, oh, we're good. We can. After the holdup at the convenience store where Cassie and Charles were there, he was like, no, I was wrong to move y'all back here. We really gotta leave. And then after the kidnapping, they're just like, we really gotta leave. And a white family puts an offer on the house and everything like that. And they're just like, no, we're good. We're here. We're here to stay now. The worst is over, I'm sure.
And and that kidnapping plot will take us out of season 1 and into season 2. So season 1, good, bad, or basic?
I thought season 1 was fantastic.
Same. I think season 1 is good. There is some, I think, propaganda, but I'm fine with it just because of the general premise. I think season 1 is solid.
Yeah, I definitely got that propaganda vibe. And the only reason I let it slide with this show is because Eddie isn't someone who crosses the line. He has a very strong moral fiber, and the show doesn't expect you to root for him when he does bullshit, because he doesn't.
Right. And I think because the show also has characters and actors within its narrative that question Eddie and question the police force in general and hold them to task, that I also don't hate it. And we have those actors sort of in Reverend Hammond. Reverend Hammond will be someone who is very much about accountability. The show doesn't pretend that there are no bad cops because we see Lund, we see Powell.
It's not in NYPD Blue. It's not a Law and Order.
Right.
So it's not going to be stand behind the blue wall of silence, my brothers, or whatever bullshit the police tell themselves. So let's jump into season 2. Season 2 was 10 episodes long, and season 2 was actually, it felt very different because Alex said it. Season 1 felt more like a 24. And in season 2, we delve more into the lives of Eddie's family and their day-to-day lives, not just major things like kidnappings and holdup. We also meet Lund's daughter, Marika, who becomes a recurring character on the show. And I really loved season 2. Season 2 was one of my favorite seasons. So let's jump in it. In the very first episode of season 2, a riot breaks out at the school, and the riot has spilled out onto the streets.
And something I think that is even super interesting about when the riot breaks out at the high school is that when Eddie and the rest of the cops are sort of alerted, the police chief is very specific to say that it's not a riot, that it's just some kids from the high school acting stupid. It'll always be the details of things of this show that really set it apart. And then not only that, I think in the riot we see that this community, and not even just the riot, I think through the course of season 1 and season 2, throughout the course of the series, really, but definitely in the riot, quote unquote, is that we'll see that this community is just a community like any other community. Cassie and Charles are trying to find each other, but, along the way they encounter like little old ladies in shopping carts that they know that they always, say hello to when they go to the corner store. Or you'll have Jake, the guy who runs the hardware store, like when Eddie gets hurt, Jake is like, and, a group of kids are like running up on Eddie. Jake comes and he's like, listen, I know your mom, and I know your mom. Like, what are y'all doing? Which really, really helps to ground the series and ground the world into something that is not set apart from any other place, right?
Yeah, it doesn't other Lincoln Heights. It fully embraces that this is their community. When I was watching the show, all I could think constantly was that the show really embodied the it takes a village ideology, not just when it came to raising children and everyone coming together to look out for them, to tattle on them when necessary, to help them, but also when it came to like looking out for and protecting your neighbors. You live here and this person lives here too. Nobody's going anywhere. So, act right.
So Cassie and Charles, there are a lot of drama, and there will be a lot of drama throughout the run of the series. Cassie decides like she wants to have sex, and she's like really about it, and she sort of makes up her mind. Shout out to Cassie. She takes charge of her sexual health, and she's like, she asks Charles if he's ever like been tested, and he's like, no. And she makes him go get tested before like she even wants to like do any of that. So that's really great.
I enjoy Cassie and Charles's relationship because there are ongoing conversations about sex, sexual health, and, eventually they actually have sex, which is interesting because a lot of Black girls on TV really don't get that. Or if they do, it's not really showcased as something romantic or really something that the show lingers on in a significant way. Lizzie and Tay have really significant plots in like season 2. And I mean, well, not super significant, but like they're never forgotten about. Lizzie gets a P.O. box to start receiving letters from Boa, who was one of the guys who kidnapped her, but like was kind to her and tried to save her in that situation. And this starts a whole conversation about restorative justice and forgiveness and things like that. Tay is a type 1 diabetic, which we learned in season 1, but in season 2, like during the riot, we see how this actually affects him. And it becomes a whole thing to like get him out of that situation and get him something to eat quick before his like blood sugar completely crashes. There's a really funny episode where he poses a 21-year-old online to meet a 16-year-old and gets caught in like a sex predator sting operation. They do really, really cool things to like remind you like they exist. They're not just like filler children on the show.
Right. And it's so great because it doesn't exist purely as like this idea for restorative justice, but also for Lizzie to come to terms with her own trauma around the kidnapping, right?
Right.
She does have a lot of sort of trauma, and she's trying to figure it out in her head. The show, I think, takes great pains to show that these letters for her are an outlet as well. Eddie is not on board.
He's not. And he and Jen's reactions are very justifiable. I'm going to say one sticking point I had with that plot, though, and this is one point of contention. In Boa's letters to Lizzie, he constantly says how, her letters are what's keeping him sane and alive in there, and his letters mean so much to her. I feel like this is a lot of undue pressure to put on a child. Not to say that these things are not true, but now she's bearing the weight of like basically being the person who's keeping you afloat. Lizzie is a lot like Eddie. She's a fixer, and in trying to fix other aspects of Boa's life, we really see that at the end of the day, she's just a kid. I think that forgiving Boa was great. It was a great plot. Humanizing him, even though he is a kidnapper and a gangbanger and a drug dealer, was also a really great plot because, yeah, he made a lot of bad decisions, but like people aren't just monsters. They don't do just like foul shit overnight. Right? Mm-hmm. There were roads leading to this.
Having the audience, relate to Boa, but also reinforcing, I think, this bigger idea that this show, I think, is interested in, which is cyclical nature of poverty and like how poverty makes people desperate to do things that I think they never thought that they would do in their whole lives, you know?
Right. I mean, outside of the Bishop character, whose real name is Khan, we really don't meet anyone who's like, yeah, I'm a gangbanger and I'm loud and I'm proud. This is what I've always wanted.
Right. And I think, and once again, I think that even that is significant as well. The fact that Bishop really is the only true, I guess, supervillain. Everybody that works for Bishop or is under Bishop is just somebody in a desperate situation.
We talk about this later in the series when like we meet other gang members and later when a gang member actually tries to solicit Tay. So like they actually talk about how a lot of these boys are under pressure in their community to click up and join a gang. And like even if they don't want to, you're either a part of the gang or you're a target of the gang, right?
Right. And the pressure to recruit, right? Because, you know, everybody that dies or goes to jail, you know, those people need to be replaced. It's like any other sort of extremely exploitative, violent business, right?
Right. Exactly that. So, you know, it already deals with these really hard things. In this season 2, a gang member named Desmond, played by Sinqua Walls of he was on Power, he was on Teen Wolf before that. He's been everywhere. But he tries to intimidate Tay into joining this gang, and Ruben saves Tay. And then later, Eddie, I would probably say this was the one time he crossed the moral line. Eddie and Powell, this black cop who's like has a hard on for police brutality, humiliate Desmond in front of his boys to get him to back off of Tay. Desmond retaliates by bringing a gun to the unveiling of a mural that Cassie was painting, takes a shot at Tay, and Tay is saved by Ruben. Ruben is another great character when we talk about restorative justice because Ruben killed Eddie's mom but ended up saving his son, which is obviously a very complicated set of emotions for Eddie to have.
I want to reiterate for the audience, like in between all of the, you know, what we're talking about with these plots and these ideas, there's stuff like the kids throwing like a party at the house and like, and getting into all this sort of other like goofy, like day-to-day trouble, you know, throwing a party at the house while their parents are away and like, you know, joining the school basketball team and like all this sort of like normal ass shit. And that is what makes the show so significant. The show really does find that balance between all these big, heavy ideas and then all this shit that's like super fun, right?
Right. We never forget that this is a family show, that this is a family, that these are children, that Eddie and Jen are a couple. Things like this that kind of ground us back to the show's like central focus on family and community. One of the last large plot points of season 2 is the car accident that Charles and Sage get into. It's a pretty bad accident. They're both trying to run away. It's revealed prior to this that one of the reasons that Charles hates his stepfather, Mac, is because Mac tried to molest him. We definitely don't talk enough about sexual abuse of boys in TV in general. And Sage feels that distance from her father, who was absent for most of her life, and she wants to run away too. And they get into this horrible car accident. They were both in critical condition, and Sage doesn't even recover by the end of season 2. She's still in a medically induced coma. But Charles gets out of the hospital. He has a broken leg, but he gets out of the hospital at the end of season 2. And him and Cassie, decide to be on again for good.
Because their drama is endless. So let's talk about Charles. Let's talk about Charles just as a character for a minute. Charles is an interesting character. He's like our only, not our only, but like probably... he's like one of our more prominent white characters on the show. The white people on the show are few. It's like Lund, Charles, and Sage. Sage is interesting, and Lund is, he's Lund. I don't know. What do you want from him? But Charles is interesting. So Charles is an interesting figure. And then I think in the general cultural consciousness, we talk a lot about the poor white people. And I think whenever white people do like some sort of like weird, dumb shit, like they're always, they like to sit of like, oh, well, I grew up in this poor community next to the blacks. So I too am, something or whatever.
I'm Negro adjacent.
Charles is the character that actually like explores this idea. Charles is low income, right? His mother, he doesn't know yet who or where his father is. His mother is neglectful. She's sort of in and out, but it's because she's working. But even then, he's also working to support them, right? Her income still like isn't enough. So he's working and he's going to school. He's grown up poor. He's growing up in the neighborhood. The Charles character is super interesting, just because I think of how he relates to the Sutton family. Charles doesn't have family. And I do think part of like what drives Charles or like why he's attracted to Cassie and this sort of unit is also something that we've talked about on other shows with other characters about this desire to watch a family up close. It's actually what we talked about on Parenthood with regards to Alex. I think Charles is the flip side of that a little bit.
Yeah, Alex and the girl Dylan that Max had a crush on, they both just wanted to be around the Braverman family. And Charles is a lesser degree of that. Charles really is in love with Cassie. I think her family is just like a bonus. Like he would be with Cassie even if she had no family, but her family gives him the sort of grounding and the sort of sense of belonging that he's never really had. Because he and his mother have a very tense relationship on account of her working all the time and then her always taking up for her boyfriend, or excuse me, her husband, his former stepfather, Mac. So it's one of those things where she doesn't even believe what he's accusing Mac of all of this time until Cassie brings her Mac's arrest record, like prior arrest records of, lewd acts on a minor and things like that.
Right. Poor Charles.
Right. Like, like he's your kid. And why would someone lie about that?
Also, season 2 is when the music on the show really starts to come up in a big way.
Yeah, we had a lot of like guest musical stars at this coffee house called Revolution, which it's interesting because this is definitely an idea that One Tree Hill started off with, like having musical guests perform as themselves on the show.
Right.
And then Lincoln Heights took it as well. It didn't last super long, and they didn't have the catalog of artists that One Tree Hill had, but they had some really great artists. Like they had Chrisette Michele was on an episode, Trey Songz was on an episode, Solange was at the prom episode and later seasons. We see a lot of like really, really interesting artists that were on the come up back in 2007.
Yeah, and then like, oh, I forgot that person even existed, like Elliot Yamin.
Yes.
All these random people. I was like, oh, that's great. Also, season 2 is when we meet like Luke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Cassie's boss, and they're in this brief thing during her breakup with Charles. It's actually what facilitated the breakup with Charles was Charles's jealousy.
Yeah, he gets weird and like jealous. And listen, that'll kill you every time. That'll mess up your shit. But then he's also like a weird actor in that like. There's this strange plot with Luke and Tay in like a recording studio, and I'm still not sure I understand the point was to be like the music business is shady, but I don't think I understood like the bigger point. Do you know?
I honestly, like, of all the episodes, I would say this was the filler episode. I don't know why it was here. I don't know why we needed to see this. I don't know what role Luke was playing. Like, it was very clear that this guy controlled him or had something on him. We don't know what the hell it is. Luke ends up leaving when his band gets like a 3-album deal. So clearly he wasn't that attached to this creepy record producer guy. But I think the point was supposed to be like a cautionary tale.
Right. I was like, I think it's supposed to be a cautionary tale, but I don't get like, yeah, because like that's the only thing. It's like, I was like, wait, is this shady guy like funding everything? Like he's the sort of investor. So that's why I think there was some, okay, so like, it's sort of like famously understood that like there are a lot of like record labels that were essentially funded with drug money. Like you would have like, and it's specifically like hip hop labels that were first started from like the investors were like drug kingpins, and they would use like the kingpins would like launder their money through record labels. And that's why sometimes you'll see like hip hop artists on like FBI watch lists. And I'm wondering if like this was supposed to be like, that plot was supposed to be like a nod to that, but then it never quite like is realized as everything else on the show.
Right. I mean, if that's where we're going, like, we're going to need some follow-up, you guys. It's interesting because, like, when Eddie comes into the record studio and is like, give me this bullshit contract, and the guy's like, he signed a contract. I'm like, he's 14. He didn't sign shit. Like, what are you talking about? Like, even the shadiest of the shady criminals knows that when the kid's parent shows up, like, it's done. It's a done deal. Maybe you can trick a kid to thinking that contract is legit, but you can't fool an adult into thinking that.
Really quickly, before we sort of give a grade and move on to season 3, let's talk about Powell for a bit, because season 2 is like when we meet Powell.
Yeah. So Powell's an interesting one because, like I said, he is a cop who never met a criminal that he didn't feel like brutalizing, basically.
Right.
He when we first meet him, he shoots someone whom he claims is going for a gun, but definitely was not. And we learn at the unveiling of Cassie's mural that his daughter Annabella was a victim of gun violence. And so this gives us an inkling of why he reacts the way that he does to criminals, especially gangbangers. Powell is definitely on like the darker side of gray. But the show even tries to humanize him. And basically, when he and Eddie are partnered temporarily, Eddie becomes something of his conscience the way that Reverend Hammond is to Eddie.
Right. Powell is probably the closest we'll come to a Black, like, Republican figure without the show sort of outright saying it.
Oh, yeah. He reeks of build that wall. But yeah, he's definitely that figure. And Powell is kind of like the embodiment of that type of cop figure.
He absolutely is.
Like, maybe we share skin color, but these are not my people. These are not my community. I don't have anything in common with these animals, or lock them up.
No, absolutely. And even then, when Powell gets into like a bit of trouble, and Eddie then has to make a choice about does he protect Powell or not, in terms of the questioning after, it's even just posing that question is so, even just the writers writing that, it poses this question of like, you know, in terms of Eddie having to lie for Powell, it's like, it's not just a Blue Brothers type of thing. It's like, do you protect another Black person in this inherently white supremacist organization, or do you not? Right. Like, what's the answer? And there isn't an easy one, I don't think.
And when Eddie does the right thing and he tells exactly what happened from his point of view, it doesn't win him any points. And even when his partner Lund will agree, like, it's the right thing, he'll be like, you're stirring up trouble, or you're making trouble for the both of us. Things of that nature.
Right. And Lund will always beat that drum. will always beat the drum of why, oh dear, oh Eddie, why do you have to just care about these people? Like, why do you care about any of these people? That'll always be Lun's sort of like zero.
Right. It's which is sad, but that character and I felt London Powell, I felt were two characters that were written very, very realistically.
Same.
I don't think there are a lot of cops like Eddie, but I do think there are a lot of cops like Kevin Lund and Officer Powell.
Same.
What do we think of season 2, Alex? Good, bad, or basic?
Another good for me. I think beyond that sort of weird, like Tay signing this shady music contract plot. I think all these episodes are solid. I think Reverend Hammond dying was it did hit me emotionally, and even just Lizzie in the aftermath of it, Lizzie sort of losing her friend in Reverend Hammond and all the stuff that happens in season 2. I love it. I think it's a solid good.
Yeah, I thought that season 2 was very good. Seeing the community come together to mourn Reverend Hammond was really, really beautiful too. Yeah, I think season 2 is my favorite season overall. I'm not gonna lie. I think it was had the best standalone episodes and the best pacing of the plot lines that span the entire season. Let's talk about what made season 3 so great. When we open in season 3, Charles is fully recovered, leg is no longer broken, but Sage is still in a coma, you guys.
Yeah, poor Sage. In season 3, we open with Eddie and Jen taking a very well-deserved vacation because shit's been crazy. But while they're away, the house gets broken into again because this poor house cannot see any rest. Which, listen, to the show's credit, they will come up with a reason of why this house is continuously broken into. The house was broken into by Sid, who used to live in the house, or her family used to own this house before it became run down. So essentially, Sid was the one that was in the house the first time when the house is sort of raided as a drug house.
Right. So I love this entire Sid breaking into the house for a lot of reasons. And it actually spills over into season 4. But I want to go back to season 1 real quick. In season 1, when Eddie and Lund raid this crack house, Lund says something very significant. He says, "Can you believe how these people live?" Which I'm sure was a dig at the fact that it was a bunch of addicts living in the house, which is bad enough. But from the way Eddie looks at him and the way I'm looking at him could easily be interpreted as a racial comment. And Sid clearly hadn't forgotten it either, because she actually talks about it when she's in the house. When she and her boyfriend and one of her friends break into the house, she says, "I can still hear him saying that. Can you believe how these people live?" It's something that made a deep impact on her, and it's part of what's fueling her rage.
She's looking for something, and granted, she's still an addict with her and her boyfriend. Also, the friend that breaks in with them is a very young Jesse T. Usher, who will go on to play. Who will go on to be in Survivor's Remorse and is also a character on The Boys, which we've talked about on our Patreon episodes. And it's cool to see him here. He's such a baby, in this episode.
Oh my God. We're gonna when we finish these seasons, we're gonna have to talk about all of the people from really hit shows that were that made an appearance or were a significant character on this show. It's crazy.
It's really crazy. Shout out, once again, shout out to casting and on Lincoln Heights. They had the eye. They just knew who was gonna be that person afterward. Yeah, she's looking for something, and something that I love about this opening is that yes, they essentially, the show goes back and really humanizes Sid and humanizes her, and we get a sort of full scope of who she is and what she wants and the reason and the legitimate reason for her anger.
This was her house. The house was owned by her grandmother. It was her family's house. And when it was raided in that, that raid, that, I can't call it a drug bust, but basically it was a drug house. It was a crack house. So they raided it. They scooted everyone out. They herded them all out. Eddie got the property and, renovated it, refurnished it, and moved in, giving no thought to the people who'd been there prior. And she's angry because not only is one of the cops who did this to her living in the house of her family now, but she feels as if there is a family heirloom. She assumes it to be money that is stashed somewhere in the house.
It's essentially a comment on Black gentrification.
Right. What they did was a form of gentrification. They got the house at below market value because it was a crack house. They got the house at below market value because it was in the Lincoln Heights neighborhood and the property value had plummeted over the many years. They were able to pay in their mortgage less than they were paying in that Mission Vista apartment because of the circumstances surrounding the house and the neighborhood that the house was in. They absolutely profited from, the circumstances of the house. And the show kind of puts a highlight on that.
Right. It puts a highlight and it gives a face and I think a story to the people who are lost behind, who are left behind.
Eddie does what he does best. He talks to this girl. This is something that he and Lizzie are very good at, like talking people into doing the right thing. And basically tells her, don't throw your fucking life away. I won't shoot if you won't shoot. We'll walk out of here calmly. And he keeps his word. And Sid is arrested. But that is absolutely not the last we see of her. We see her meet her again in season 4. And it's such a well done, I feel like, closure. She gets a really great character arc, especially for a recurring character.
She does. It's an excellent closure for this series and for her. And it's wonderful. And we'll get to it.
When Eddie and Jen are trying to race home when they realize that there are intruders in their home and that Cassie's at the house, he forgot his badge at the beach. And that's when Eddie has to learn for the first time in his life that a Black cop is Black first and will be treated accordingly. And I felt like it was a significant moment, even though it didn't last long, because Eddie kind of got that wake-up call. He was just like, I'm just going to show him my badge and we'll be on our way. But who are you without that badge? You're just another Negro.
So also in this season, Sage wakes up.
Right in the nick of time, too, because old girl's mom was about to take her off that medically induced coma.
She was. Mom was about to pull the plug.
Lund was like, no, you can't do this to my baby. And her mom was like, listen, this is expensive.
And listen, to the mom's credit, the mom is like, listen, I've been here before. I went through this with, she named some other family member. And she goes, and it was awful. It was awful to watch them sort of waste away in body, knowing that they were never going to come back. And then, yes, also, in addition, they're only for them to still die. Yeah, in addition, these exorbitant medical bills. So...
Right. She's not just some monster who doesn't give a fuck about her daughter. And we can talk about how, he's willing to fight for Sage and keep her on this medically induced coma, which is essentially life support. But he, like Alex said, he'd never been through this, but his ex-wife had. 3 significant things happened this season, and we can talk about them in whatever order. We meet the new church Reverend Kingston. Charles and Cassie finally have sex, and Lizzie goes to a new prestigious private school.
Right. And those are all really significant. So this is also the season where Solange performs at the prom. It's really, because I was so I did not remember that happened. And when I came up on the episode and I'm watching it, and then it's like, Solange, I was like, wait, what the fuck is Solange doing on this show?
Right. I thought y'all were poor.
Right? I thought this was a poor community. How do you guys afford to pay Solange to perform at the prom? And then, not only that, she's performing, a Hadley Street Dreams records. I was like, what is going on? This is such a blast from the past. The Kingstons are super, super interesting because they provide a direct contrast to the Hammonds, whereas the Hammonds were these people who
very much cared about the community. And the show coded as like caring about this community, caring about how this community is being policed, caring about access to health and food and all these things in providing support. The Kingstons are definitely like your Kanye Wests and your Joel Osteens and your I don't know, who was that pastor who was like, pay for, God wants y'all to pay for like my new private jet? Who was that?
Creflo Dollar.
Creflo Dollar. Like the Kingstons are.
His name is literally Dollar. Y'all knew better. I love the Hammonds. Now the Hammonds, I don't believe they had any children, did they? Or their children were like adults. I'm not sure which one it was. Reverend Hammond's wife is still a big fixture. I love this actress. Mrs. Hammond is played by Tina Lifford, who also went on to play Renee Tressel, Jasmine's mom on Parenthood, and is currently playing Aunt Violet, Violet Bordelon on Queen Sugar. So she's an OG. She's been in this thing. And to the show's credit, she is still a significant recurring character even after Reverend Hammond's death. But the Kingstons are absolutely nothing like the Hammonds. Reverend Kingston in particular is really in it for the money. His children, Stacy and Devin, are really cool. And in their interactions with Tay, Lizzie, and Cassie, we really see them as great people. Reverend Kingston is really just here essentially to pull a real estate scam. Like he's in a poor community and he's trying to buy up some shit and let money change hands.
To the show's credit, they never let up on the Kingstons. So Stacy is gay. Yeah, she comes out because she does ask the other girl to prom. We don't really fully get to explore like Stacy's sort of predicament, but we do see Cassie be like a good friend to Stacy, and vice versa. And I think it's just unfortunate that we don't really get to spend more time on this Black female, like LGBTQI experience, particularly being a girl who's closeted and in a religious family.
Right. The show tells us that her brother already knows she's gay, and he says as much. And then when the Kingstons first have dinner with the Suttons, before Eddie realizes what type of person Reverend Kingston is, her father makes this comment where, for me, that was a dead giveaway that he knew that she was gay, where he asked Cassie, do you know any nice boys he can set her up with? Most fathers, especially religious ones, aren't trying to set their daughters up on dates with boys unless they know that daughter is interested in girls. This is just my experience. Stacy attempts to ask this girl to the prom, but then the girl tells her she already has a date. And then she asks her to dance at the prom after her father, who's one of the chaperones, tries to push her to dance with a boy because, again, he knows she's gay. And it's really not an issue of her coming out, but her family, her father and her mother specifically trying to keep her in the closet. And she dances at prom with this other girl in front of everyone. And like the pretense is up, the jig is up. Like she's not faking the funk anymore to please her family. And we really see like Stacy grab her freedom in this very ballsy way, which I thought was really great to watch. And she's a Black girl and she's religious and she's dark skinned and she's all the type of lesbian representation that we really don't see on television often.
Right. And, you know, it's getting slightly better, but I think even now if we see Black lesbians on television who are dark skinned, they're usually studs and they're mask presenting, which is fine. But like I think there's also just a knee jerk colorist reaction to always associate dark skin with masculinity.
Absolutely.
So the fact that Stacey is dark skin, a lesbian, and she's femme is a big deal.
Right, because when we do see femme characters that are Black, they're very light skinned or biracial or multiracial. And I think that's significant because just like we associate dark skin with masculinity, we associate lighter skin with femininity. And who says that studs can't be high yellow? Who says that femme girls can't be dark? Right. So, and it was kind of like a femme on femme situation too, where the girl that she had a crush on was also femme, which we hadn't seen a lot of at that time. I think the only representation of anything like that was probably like on the L Word. Usually lesbian portrayals on television are always like a femme for a stud. And like it's never two femmes or two studs. Like two studs is almost never seen, which is ridiculous. But we got to see a lot with Stacey Kingston. Unfortunately, the character leaves town, her and her brother, when Reverend Kingston does. So we don't see them in season 4, but Devin makes a huge impact. So let's segue right into, I want to talk briefly about Lizzie's experiences at her private school. What do you think about that?
Interesting. I like that the show, it's thinking about this idea of education versus schooling, that just because you can go somewhere where like the schooling is better doesn't necessarily mean like the education will be better, and doesn't necessarily mean that like you won't find other problems. I think it's significant that, first of all these kids are going to that Eddie wasn't even sending any of his kids to private school from the jump, that they all go to public school, and that they're all getting reasonably great educations. It's just that Lizzie's gifted. I even like before where Lizzie's like, I like my school. I like being here. I don't want to leave. And even Jen, who had that private school experience, is sort of like, they come with their own set of issues and own sets of troubles, which they do, and we see. And it's great that the show looks at.
All of that to say that Lizzie's new school is racist as fuck, and only wanted her because they needed a great basketball player to round out their weak ass team. And she was not going to allow herself to be used. And this girl got herself right back to Lincoln Heights, which was the better option for her. So let's talk about 2 more significant plot lines in season 3. The first is Charles's boss, Serena, and the second is Eddie's discovery that Dana's son, Nate, is his son.
Ugh, do we have to talk about Serena? That was such a dumb plot.
We have to, because they never stop doing this shit. But Lincoln Heights is the one show that handled it correctly, where the older woman is making these aggressive moves towards a young man, and he doesn't see it as a compliment. He doesn't think that she's going to teach me so much. He doesn't feel special from the attention. He realizes her as a predator that she is and rejects her, which is significant.
We don't get a lot of stories where a white woman is in a position of power and like the show is taking a definitive stance on the fact that she sucks. And it's interesting because I think this is something, even that whole plot is something that I think MRAs like go up about. You feminist bitches don't care when you don't care when like men are like, preyed upon, rah, rah, rah. And like, here it is in real time. And like, here, we care. See?
Right. And it must be noted that they literally only mention men being sexually harassed or men being raped or men being sexually abused when women are talking about our own experiences. They use it as a derailment tactic and not something they actually give a fuck about.
Right. Because like we give a fuck about it too. And like I said, here, we care. This plot is particularly egregious, and it hurts in a sense to see because, like we said, Charles is poor. Charles does not have a lot of outs. I mean, Cassie's going to be fine. Cassie's mom is rich and, they have those connections, and Cassie will go to a fancy art school, and Cassie's aunt in particular is all about the bag, which we will talk about a bit more in season 4. So Cassie will probably be okay. Charles is poor. Charles is, and you know what? If we think about it, Charles will also be okay when we get to season 4. But like, at this point, in the narrative, Charles doesn't have a lot of options. He doesn't have a lot of ways out of this community. He doesn't have a lot of prospects. And this sort of design opportunity, because Serena comes along due to Charles applying for this design internship work thing, and he gets in, and she is assigned to him to be, his mentor. And this is a big deal because this could mean real prospects outside of high school and real prospects in his life, and it's ruined because she's a predator.
Right. She's not just a predator. She's a manipulator, right? We see her go through lengths to try to pit Charles against Cassie and Cassie against Charles, meanwhile pretending to care so much about both of them and their relationship.
Right. She tries really hard to pass herself, not tries, like, I mean, she succeeds, to pass herself off as this sort of big sister, like, not even big sister, like, but yeah, big sister, like aunt type figure to both of them, especially to Cassie, as like being really interested in her work and her art and her trajectory. Not only as Charles's girlfriend, but as like, you know, woman to woman. So the fact that she does turn out to be this nefarious is really ugly.
It's not a mystery what's happening with Serena. Like, it might have, we can see how Cassie and Charles are fooled, right? But we, the audience, are privy to every conversation she has with each of them. We spot her lies and her manipulations early on, so it doesn't feel like they're trying to give like rush to the finish line, so to speak. When she is exposed as what she is, like, for us, it feels like, okay, about time. So when the season ends, two things happen in the earthquake that hits California and hits that area. Eddie figures out that Nate is his son and has to give him a blood transfusion since Dana doesn't share his blood type. And when performing this transfusion at their house, Jen learns that Eddie is Nate Rade's father. So she and Eddie figure this out on the same day. Dana had only just recently told Nate Rade to prevent him from re-enlisting in the army because she really doesn't want her son to go back. And during the earthquake, the hidden room in their house splits to reveal yet another hidden room. One of the bricks comes loose and Charles finds money in the attic and takes it. And I don't blame him one single bit.
Yeah, like, you feel like it, like he should have taken it, but like you also don't really blame him. He's in a really, like, Charles is in a really bad situation.
We mentioned that he's poor, right?
Yeah, like they are working poor. Season 3, good, bad, or basic.
Season 3 was very good.
I like it. I think it's good.
All right, so let's jump into season 4. Season 4 was the last season of Lincoln Heights. It was also 10 episodes long, and it takes us to a couple months after the earthquake. The family is back in a one-bathroom apartment. Charles still hasn't told them about the money. He isn't blowing it all. Like, kudos to Charles for not feeling like he hit the lotto and buying a new car. He's being very mindful of the money while he and Sage are, like, stuck in FEMA housing. They're, like, stuck in these FEMA apartments, and he's using the money very, very carefully. He hasn't deposited it in a bank, but he keeps it close to him in his toolbox. Nate is a police officer now, and Jen's father basically helps the family get a new house, which he isn't very shy about telling everyone that he's doing. And he clearly feels very happy that he can do this thing for his family that Eddie cannot. Because in a lot of ways, Jen is the Black Lorelai Gilmore. She's poor, quote unquote, with Eddie, but she knows that she asked her father for some money, he's gonna break her off.
Right. Like, he's not going to be happy about it. Like, and Eddie's not going to be happy because Eddie's very prideful. And he's not going to be happy about Jen asking, but, you know, they'll do it if they have to. So something that had happened in the earthquake was that Charles's stepfather had come back. And during the earthquake, this fridge and I think a wall and a fridge like fall on him and like crush him.
Yeah, it's just the fridge.
And other debris like crush him, and they sort of just like, but he's alive, and they sort of just like leave him there to die, which is like really aggro. Which is so, yeah, it's really aggro. But like, because I'm like, yikes, those two cannot keep a secret to save their lives. But
You mean Cassie can't keep a secret to save her life? Charles was keeping his mouth shut just fine, you guys.
Cassie cannot
Cassie doesn't even know what that is to be hard for like 2 seconds. She like cannot deal. So she's like sort of, but like she's breaking under the weight of the subsequent investigation into Mac's death. Nobody gets picked up, but like, my God, it's ridiculous.
Right. They are questioned. They do get their houses searched, and eventually the charges are dropped. But like, when this was happening, like high key, I was Team Charles, because the reason he died, and the investigators say this, is not because the fridge fell on him necessarily. I mean, that helped, but because at the time when the fridge fell on him, he was holding a knife that he was threatening them with. Okay. And when the fridge fell on him, the knife plunged into his lower abdomen. That's what killed him. And that's why, because he had the knife, was the reason Charles didn't want to help him. And I was very much Team Charles on that. I'm not going to get the fridge off the guy who was just threatening to slit my throat. Sorry.
Right. Cassie does not feel, she's like, he's a person like who lived.
Who tried to kidnap you at prom, but okay, girl.
So she's not particularly with that line of thought, but she, to the point where she can't even keep their story straight. But eventually she does, pull it together, I guess, and does what she needs to do. Like we said, Chadwick Boseman is Nate, which is cool to watch. Also, Tyler Posey shows up this season, which is nuts. Also, the guy who was Paolo and Lizzie McGuire is in this season from like the Lizzie McGuire movie. He shows up. All these fun people show up.
Tyler Hoechlin from Teen Wolf also shows up. He's Sage's boyfriend in this season.
And then we see very briefly a super young Kofi Siriboe, who will go on to be on Queen Sugar. And then Lee Thompson Young. We see Lee Thompson Young, which is, it's always bittersweet to see Lee Thompson Young in things.
It is. R.I.P. This season was super aggravating for me where Jen was concerned. So we learned last season that Nate is Eddie's son. And Tay's taking it badly, which is understandable because he went from being the only son to the youngest son. Eddie's trying to bond with his son and not necessarily make up for lost time, but have a relationship with the son that he'd been deprived of for all these years. And Tay's not taking it well. But Tay's a teenager. I expect that behavior. Jen, however, was super aggravating. There's even one instance in episode 2 where she chastises Eddie for being too buddy-buddy with Nate. Like he cannot like interact with his son or be affectionate towards him in front of Tay. And really, that's just a projection of her own feelings about Dana. And she's using Tay to justify those feelings.
Right. But I also think that's, I don't know, that feels very Jen.
It's very real. It's very Jen. It's just super aggravating.
It is. It's aggravating, but it feels super Jen. And I think that's something I just don't think she anticipated that like a blended family would be something that she would have to deal with. And now here it is. And it manifests in her sort of aggravation with Nate Ray, but I think her aggravation in Nate Ray is also a manifestation of her sort of classism that she feels, because once again, it's like she's permanently tied to Dana and Nate and Jerome. And that is something I think that eats at her. That's another plot that sort of comes back around, is Jerome is starting to get into trouble around the neighborhood, in that he's, hanging out with the wrong people. He's not doing what he says he's going to do. He's, staying out till the streetlights come on, and he's so young. And so Dana, I think, talks to Eddie, and is like, can Jerome hang out with Tay? Tay's a good influence. And Eddie wasn't even sure why they stopped hanging out. And Jen is like, oh, I said that they couldn't. And Eddie's like, why? And she goes, well, he's a bad influence. Like, he doesn't need to be around Tay. And the fact that Jen can't find compassion or can't find empathy for Dana and for Jerome and for Nate is part of the course with Jen.
Yeah. Like I said, Jen is like for me, like the least likable character on this show, of the main characters anyway, for this reason. She lacks a lot of empathy. She lacks a lot of compassion. It's very clear that her relationship with Eddie is predicated on the idea that she thinks he is the token of the Lincoln Heights community, that she thinks nothing good comes of this community and her husband is the exception.
Right.
That relationship is interesting, and seeing her kind of wrestle with her jealousy towards Dana, which is, warring with her classism towards Dana simultaneously, is really interesting to watch. So Jen and Dana had this really great conversation in this season where Jerome was over, and Tay was making beats, and Jerome was helping him make beats, and they started rapping. And Jen heard what they were rapping about and basically chastised Jerome and told him to be like his older brother, Nate, who had re-enlisted at this point. And Dana confronts Jen later. It was like, did you tell my son to join the army? He's like, no, I just told him to follow his brother's example. And she's like, how would you feel if Tate went out to, if Tate went out to Afghanistan to get shot? Do you think that's all my kids are good for? Right? Is like holding a weapon and going to fight some war. And this is real, because when Army recruiters go to high schools and shit like that, they go to low income neighborhoods. They go and target the kids who feel like they have no other option and no way out. And Jen absolutely wouldn't want that life for Tay. So why are you suggesting it for Dana's son?
Right. And when Nate does come back, and Nate, there's this amazing sort of PTSD storyline that we follow. But another thing, which is great because they shine a light on that. But I think another thing of, and this is not necessarily a sticking point that I have, particularly with the show, because I think a lot of other Black shows do this, but I would really like to see, and to the show's credit, the fact that Jen and Dana do have that conversation is significant in terms of thinking about what I'm about to say. But I would be interested, I think, in the future of, Black shows divesting from this idea that going off to war or like joining the military to essentially, aid and continue a sort of American imperialism is something that equals immediate respectability. Mm-hmm. I definitely think I'd like to see more shows start to divest from that idea.
Right. In a smaller sense that some people think that being a cop is respectable, they definitely think that being a soldier is respectable. And it's interesting because when Tay and Jerome were rapping, they were rapping about turf wars and defending your own. Isn't that technically what people do in the army, except they bring the turf war to people in other countries? Like, it's not relegated to your block. This is a global turf war.
Right. Because the line that we're always fed culturally is that, like, we're furthering democracy, but we know that's not really real. There are definitely way more actors and way more reasons of why we're in a place because we're in a place. Because if troops being deployed overseas was specifically was always about human rights and furthering democracy and protecting oppressed peoples, like, we would be in a lot more places, and we would not be concentrated in the areas I think that we're concentrated in. All that to say, I just want us to divest from American imperialism being like respectable. That's it. That's all I have.
I do as well. We can see why a drive-by is such a horrible crime. Then why do you not see why, like, for instance, shooting up a neighborhood in Iraq or dropping drones in Afghanistan is not a crime of the same impact to those people, right? Part of the machine is to dehumanize your opponent, which is a tried and true gang tactic. Everybody that's in your gang is worthy and everyone else is just other. They don't matter. We need to come to terms with how, it's a lot of the same ideologies and a lot of the same methodologies, just on a greater scale. So that's why season 4 really didn't hit for me, because they were two very pro-military, pro the troops for me. And I think Dana was the only person thinking clearly or saying what I wanted to say in that regard. Like, these young boys from poor communities matter so much more than just to be a pawn in someone's war.
So I said this before. I think I said this before in the Gilmore Girls episode, and in Lincoln Heights, it still rings true. One dead white uncle, one white daddy can like change your whole fucking future. You just need one. You just need one. And we see that with Charles, who finally figures out who his father is this season. And he goes out there and it turns out rich as fuck. Rich as fuck.
Right. He would have been content with just anybody, but this dude got money, you guys. He got money and he's got a lot of it. Only problem is he embraces Charles in their home, but then tries to pass off Charles as his nephew when they're out and about. And, you know, it takes a while, but by the end of the season, he comes around and gap is bridged. And it's not just Charles essentially having the Suttons as a surrogate family, but having a family of his own, like a biological family of his own, other than his mother, which is something that his character truly needed and was hungry for.
Right. Cassie is like hard for like the first time in her whole life. Or I don't know, like not hard, but just definitely like does what she wants to do, I think, for the first time. And when they sort of like, you know, because Charles doesn't want to go alone, understandably, he doesn't have a lot of support systems in his life. Like she's kind of the only one. And even then Cassie is very much, I think, about, you know, her own shit. But Charles is like, please, like, come with me. Like, I don't want to be by myself when I go meet them. And she does. She goes and she gets in trouble. Eddie is like, get your ass back to this house. And she's like, I'll see you when I see you. When it doesn't go right and he needs to leave, she goes back and she gets him. And wild enough, we see Eddie like stand up for Charles. So like that's really cool to see, I think, as well. He stands up to Charles's father. So something else I want to touch on in regards to Charles Land is, so when Charles meets this family, he realizes he has like a half brother who, you know, grew up in all this wealth and privilege. And when they return to Lincoln Heights, a couple of episodes later, his brother comes to slum it, essentially. And it's a really interesting dynamic. Once again, this show, so ambitious, because it's fascinating to watch the dynamic between them, to really see that sort of characterization in that Charles takes the Suttons, I don't want to say it's predominantly Black, because I think the show does take pains to show that like Black people live there, Asian people live there, like Latino people live there. It's probably predominantly Black and Latinx neighborhood. Charles takes this neighborhood very seriously. He takes the people who live in Lincoln Heights very seriously. He takes his community really seriously. And of course, Charles's brother doesn't. And it's an interesting dynamic to see and to watch, the fact that this brother doesn't and is just sort of play acting in this neighborhood.
Yeah, Charles's half brother is definitely the epitome of white privilege and like the sort of way that white people like to play tourist in communities of color. And I think that was a great episode and a great message to have. But overall, aside from this, I actually really like the relationship between Charles and his brother, who clearly like actually does want to get to know him and doesn't feel threatened by him in the way that Nate felt threatened, or that Tay felt threatened by Nate. And you can see a burgeoning relationship there that's really, really great. But by the end of the season, Charles is enlisted in the military. And like Alex said, it only takes one rich daddy. His dad tells him, I can get you out of that, boy. Don't worry. I'll get you out of that military thing and give you some money for school. You're good. It's fine.
Right. It's fine. And that saves him. That's nuts. Also,
speaking of money.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, speaking of money, we meet Cassie's super rich aunt in New York.
Naomi.
Hey,
Naomi isn't rich of her own accord. She just has a really great sugar daddy, and Naomi's a woman who makes it clear that she doesn't stick around with any man for long, and she doesn't like suffer men who aren't useful to her. Now, the Naomi storyline is interesting, just that the character exists because we meet Jen's other sister, Vera, in season 1, who has the same mother and father as her. But when Naomi's introduced, she's introduced as Naomi Bradshaw, Jen's half sister. This is never even mentioned in the parents' relationship. But like, why does Jen's father have an outside kid? And she's clearly an outside kid because she's younger than Jen, right?
Right.
So this is a child conceived when Jen's parents were still married. They had a whole plot line when Jen's parents were potentially getting divorced and things like that. And like, it was never once mentioned that either of them had had an affair. They could have made Vera literally anybody else. I think it would have been better to make her Jen's close cousin, because just making her Jen's half sister retroactively assassinates her parents' relationship. But Vera is really glamorous and she's very cosmopolitan and she's been all over the world. And she essentially tells Cassie, girl, you need to dump your high school boyfriend.
Which, although I personally root for Cassie and Charles, fair for a lot of reasons. And she does state those reasons very clearly. She's like, and yeah, to her credit, she makes Cassie think about some hard things and some hard choices. She goes, what is he planning to do? Like, what is he planning to be? And, Charles doesn't have a plan. Because, the design thing blew up. So I guess the show doesn't show you that he was super despondent. I guess you just sort of infer that he just sort of, his plan is to just be wherever Cassie is. And, to her credit, her aunt is like, you can't have somebody like that. That's only gonna be a burden on you later. You need somebody who has their own ambition and wants to do something and is looking for something more. And ambition not even meaning to be just like, for me personally, ambition not even being rich, because money isn't everything, but ambition in terms of they want something out of their life. They're looking for whatever it is that's going to sustain them mentally and physically and emotionally.
Right, exactly that. Vera's right about a lot of things, but I think the more it kind of reminds me of Bill's relationships with his wives in Big Love. The more people say like they shouldn't be together or they can't be together, the more Cassie and Charles want to be together. Now, one of the major things that happens with Charles this season is that he actually returns the money that he stole to Eddie. Or to the family. He leaves it in a bag on their doorstep, and Eddie, being the kind of guy he is, takes it to the police to investigate. And he later realizes, because of the red dust from the money, that it came from their attic and that Charles stole it. Charles later admits to stealing it without Eddie having to ask him, which to Eddie is a big deal, that he would come clean. But that's when Sid Glass re-enters the picture, which I thought was a really, really great subplot.
Right. So, yeah, Sid re-enters and we get this sort of conclusion of the Sid plot in this house, and which is amazing. And it's not even really when Sid re-enters. I think there's an earlier episode where there's a woman who is clearly in the throes. There's a woman who's clearly in the throes of like Alzheimer's, dementia, who somehow gets into the house and she's just sitting in there. And everybody's like, who is this person?
Right. And it turns out to be Sid's great aunt Hazel, who has dementia.
Right. And they're like, who is this random ass person sitting in our house? And they all come to realize she has dementia. But she starts sort of spilling the secrets of this house, or starts spilling the beginnings of the secrets of this house. And then Sid comes back, and Eddie and Sid work together to figure out what happened to the house, what happened with the money, and they come to discover that way back, not way back, but like either her, because the woman with dementia is Sid's great aunt,
So
Right.
yeah, like two generations ago.
Yeah, 2 generations ago, somebody, the small girl, there was like, they had bought this house, and back then the house was in a predominantly white neighborhood, and so someone came and burned a cross in the yard, and the great aunt's sister died, and the money was like given to them, essentially as like blood money, to be like, oh, like your person's dead, but like here's some money. And it never, and then, the show is like, there was just like a generational curse on the house because of it.
Right. So Hazel's sister, Sid's other great aunt Minnie, when they burned the cross in this lawn, I guess she went outside and her dress caught fire, and she caught fire and died. And so they gave this family $100,000 basically out of white guilt, that the family never spent and kept in the attic, that Sid's great grandfather kept in the attic. And so this money does belong to her family. And we get to the whole story behind that. We learn that one of Eddie's mentors was actually one of the men responsible for this, right? And he does all this work for the community now, probably to assuage his conscience, but he still hasn't grown out of the racist mindsets. He still feels like what they did was, well, not necessarily justified, but that it was no big deal. And he's arrested. When Eddie realizes that this money does belong to Sid's family, he doesn't hesitate to give her all of the money, which is significant, right? Most people would have been like, listen, finders keepers, bitch, I'm out. But he gives her the money back, and she does him one better. She returns half the money to him.
Which, like, I think it would not have been me, but good for her.
Right. I'm like, she really is the wonderful person that Eddie said she is. Because he said, like, she's a good person. She's just down on her luck. But when she gave them $50,000, I was like, sis, you are better than me.
It wouldn't be me. Like,
too good for this world.
Particularly since she's been incarcerated. So, like, her shit is much, like, heavier and more difficult than theirs is. Like, she needs probably every penny of that money.
Right. It's going to be an uphill battle for her to get a job or anything like that. So you need every penny that you can save. And then the Suttons pay it forward once more when Eddie and Jen decide to give some of the money to Dana to get Jerome, who needs to be in a private school or else he's going to be recruited into a gang, off the streets. And Jen starts treating them like family. She basically comes to this epiphany that she's been petty when Nate Ray is injured, and she reads his letter from Afghanistan or Iraq, where he basically calls her a second mother and expresses his thanks to her. And she realizes how petty she's been and, does what she can for Jerome, who is his other younger brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The great part about this story that, like, although I don't think is realistic, but I like in the sense of, like, it feels good. And I think it's a fitting ending, is that the man who did burn the cross in the yard is arrested. He's and even more so, he's, I think, the sergeant, like, chief of police of, like, everybody, or some big, like, sort of police position. He does get, like, arrested and goes to jail for that crime, which is really it feels really good.
Right. And the irony is that this man was the one who was leading the empathy program that Eddie had at the middle school, remember? So that for me was like the true irony, that he would lead a program like that, but never come to terms with or be held accountable for what he did, was mind-blowing, but not surprising. Another smaller subplot in season 4 that I truly, truly love is with this young girl named Brianna. Eddie finds her in this abandoned home, takes her to the hospital, and she ends up being taken in by Miss Munoz, the woman who lost 2 children in season 3. This little girl was friends with her youngest son, And when Brianna's mother is, gone, and she realizes Brianna's mother has died, she doesn't have any family left in the world, and Miss Munoz doesn't have any family left either. They basically become a family for each other. And it's so much different, right, than this girl going into foster care and being placed with whomever. She knows this woman and feels comfortable with her. And they already had a relationship. And they kind of give each other the family that they lost, which I thought was really beautiful.
Right. Right. And there's some other stuff that happens in season 4. There's this Robin Hood plot where they're I don't know, they're stealing and giving food to poor people, which is really great. It's a really great sort of redistribution of wealth thinking plot. There's also this musical that happens that I think is really silly, but is interesting for just the reason of thinking about the difficulties that communities of color have with each other, specifically Black people and Latinx people. That's interesting, and it happens primarily between Lizzie and Tyler Posey, and
yeah, Lizzie and Andrew's relationship was super cute. And I mean, I honestly really loved the whole musical plot because I thought Lizzie was overdue for something lighter. Her plots throughout the seasons have been really, really heavy. She needed something light. It's a musical, but it's age appropriate. Lizzie can sing and Lizzie can dance, and it's nice to see a happier Lizzie. And Lizzie eventually starts dating Andrew, and they're super cute together. It's very entertaining to watch, and it reminds me that this is ABC Family.
No, yeah. This is one of the lighter plots that Lizzie's given beyond the sort of day that Devin and Tay skip school, which is fun. That's also a really fun episode where they skip school because she ends up doing her costume. She ends up fashioning her uniform to look like the Britney Spears video, which is really fun and really cute and really sweet. And Tyler and Lizzie come together in the same episode where Mrs. Hammond and Eddie's dad come together. So that is also really sweet. And it's great to see, Mrs. Hammond find love again as an older Black woman with Eddie's dad.
Yeah, it's nice to see Spencer Sutton actually move on too, because he's been grieving Eddie's mom, Cassandra, all these years. And so they're both widows. And so they have this coming together. Lizzie and Andrew is just really cute. He's the best of, the best qualities that you would want in your middle school boyfriend. Andrew's mad cute. The series ends with Cassie and Charles getting practice married. They had planned to elope, but then they decide not to elope. But then Charles's mother hit up his father for a plane ticket because she didn't want to miss her son's wedding, which technically she would have missed anyway if they actually had eloped at City Hall. But they have a practice ceremony at home with the family. And it's cute without being what the fuck? You don't get married at 18.
Right. Right. I think it's supposed to be a mirror of Jen and Eddie, because they also got married that young. They also got married super young. But it's nice that it's a practice wedding, that it's we're getting married eventually type joint.
Personally, I wouldn't have minded if it was a real wedding, except that her dress and especially that veil thing were hideous. So I'm glad that was a practice ceremony and that you'll have better pictures to show your kids from a real ceremony.
Right.
Yeah.
Her was really ugly. So, and season 4 is good for me still, even with the military plot that I didn't particularly care for.
Season 4 was actually season 4 was actually my least favorite season, and that's because of the heavy military subplots. But even that season was really good. We even wrap up things with our nemesis Bishop, who returns in season 4, right, and is taken out. And so we kind of feel that last vestige of of direct threat to the family is gone, and we, like, the audience and the family can breathe freely now. A lot of great things happened for Lizzie season 4, which is the reason why I'm going to say season 4 was good. And Lizzie has like an emotional goodbye to Johnny and the ghost of Johnny, and moves on with her life, which I thought was really great closure for her character. Lizzie needed the win, you guys.
There is so much that I think culminates in season 4. I think season 4, we really come full circle with everything that the show introduced us to. So that's why I feel like you said, with Bishop, with Sid Glass, and in the house that they're living in, with Cassie and Charles, with the Jen and Dana and Nate and Jerome. I feel like it's all, even Tay, who, like, listen, they push Tay's singing career like throughout the entirety of this series, and Tay,
and
like,
then with a little help from Trey Songz and a good anthem about the military, he went viral, y'all.
He went viral. So, like, oh gosh, Trey Songz. Yes, the Trey Songz episode. God, he went viral. So, like, we assume that he'll have a hit and get a record deal. So, a legitimate one this time, and we're happy. I'm satisfied as a viewer.
I am very satisfied. I thought the show gave us a serious closure. We even see, like, Charles's parents have, like, some type of, like, reconciliation, because she was angry at his father for many, many years, justifiably, because his dad was a fucking snob. And they have their, like, you know, little come to Jesus moment, like, let's just be here for our son. Jen grows as a person. Tay finally, like, you know, mends his fences with all the petty shit he was feeling towards Nate Ray. There's just so much beautiful closure in this season that I like to see. We dive into, you know, Lizzie and this musical and the Mean Girls, and it feels very, very teen and very enjoyable. And I love everything that happens in season 4. It had a lot, like, it had so many great episodes. I couldn't choose a favorite episode of Lincoln Heights. I only know that record executive episode from season 2 was wholly unnecessary.
Right. Same. I purposely didn't talk about favorite episodes on this episode, because I really, really, really want to encourage everyone to go watch this series in its entirety. It's not long. Like I said, the episodes are, you know, your standard 42 to 46 minutes without ads. But these seasons are not long at all. And I really, 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 really want everyone to look at it. It's such a good show. Like I said, like I've been saying over and over, it's so ambitious. It's really well written. Eddie and Jen are excellent actors and actresses, and Lizzie's a good actress, and Tay has his moments, and Cassie is, you know, Cassie. But it's great. It's great. I think it's thinking about a lot of things. I think there are so many elements in this show that are still ripe for exploration and thinking about. Yeah, just definitely still there, still lots of stuff to think about.
Right. Yeah, shout out to the cast. Russell Hornsby, Nikki Michaud, Erica Hubbard. Haven't seen her in much recently, but get those checks, girl. Ryan Nicole Brown. Everybody involved in the show is great. And your girl did the math. At 43 episodes, with an average runtime of 45 minutes, it will only take you 32 and a quarter hours to watch this series in its entirety. So get on that.
Yeah, you spend more time watching like a season of The Crown. I think The Crown one season is more time than that. So
the what?
The Crown.
Oh, okay.
Probably, yeah, is like, that's longer than the entire run of the series. So please go get into it. Get into this show. It's excellent. And there you have it, folks. This is everything that we think made Lincoln Heights good, bad, basic, and unforgettable. If you'd like to watch or relive this series, Lincoln Heights is currently streaming on Hulu.
Lincoln Heights could have leaned fully into propaganda territory, but chose to steer the boat firmly as a family and community-oriented drama. which had heart, complexity, and constantly growing and evolving characters. We hope that you all have enjoyed hearing our thoughts on this Black All-American classic. Patrons, be sure to check out the GBB Lincoln Heights Spotify playlist. And with this, we officially wrap up the family season of The Good, the Bad, the Basic. Season 4, Lights, Camera, Action, premieres next week. Among the shows we'll be discussing are Survivor's Remorse, Instant Star, 30 Rock, and Unreal.
Tune in next week when Emma and I will be kicking off the new season with ABC CMT's musical drama, Nashville. The first episode airs next Thursday. If you want to watch or reload the series, Nashville is currently streaming on Hulu. Until then, our top tier patrons can tune in to our new On the Lot series. This is a series where we will be interviewing television writers, show creators, and showrunners, discussing their previous work and any current projects that they have in the works. For our first episode, we'll be going on the lot with Kathleen McGee Anderson, the executive producer of Lincoln Heights. If you're not on this tier yet, level up. The episode goes live this Saturday. In the meantime, if you'd like to watch or relive Lincoln Heights, the series is currently streaming on Hulu.
Follow The Good, the Bad, the Basic on all major podcast platforms to listen to all of our regular weekly episodes on the go. If you love this sort of content and want more, become a show producer and patron on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/goodbadbasic. Your support allows us to keep bringing you our regular weekly episodes as well as exclusive bonus material.
Be sure to follow us at Good Bad Basic Pod on Twitter. And of course, follow our SoundCloud page, The Good, the Bad, the Basic, where all of our social media links are listed. Until next time.
Bye,
everyone.